Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Woo! Where do we begin? A viral tweet in 2016 summed it up. It said this: 2015 politics, Ed Miliband eats a sandwich a bit weirdly. 2016 politics, everything is on fire. Now, the iron law of politics ever since then is, however tumultuous, however chaotic, however often terrifying you think things are, there is a long way down, often a very, very long way to go indeed. Now, if you're tuning in from 2015, welcome to Brexit Britain. Familiarize yourself with the B word. You'll get used to it. But if we were going to do a quick summation of the past few years, former reality TV host Donald Trump becomes president of the United States on a platform which fuses wanton outright racism, white nationalism, with policies in power which, of course, favour the wealthiest. He becomes the kingpin, the icon of the far right, both in the United States and, of course, all over the world. He describes neo-Nazis at Charlottesville most memorably as very fine people. Having lost the presidential election, fair and square, during a global pandemic, which has caused economic turmoil, the deaths of countless numbers of people, a death toll that grows grotesquely bigger every day. In America alone, more than those who died on 9/11 dying each and every day, as well as widespread social economic dislocation. He refuses to accept the results, whips up his followers over many weeks, culminating in him whipping up a far-right mob who stormed the Capitol. Now, thanks to a comprehensive thread by the US journalist Raphael Simonoz, we can say this: amongst them are Nazis. Let's just flash up some of the Nazis. There's some Nazis. A lot of Nazis, in fact. If we just keep going, some of the evidence. There we go. Nazis, 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 Nazis everywhere. There were a lot of Nazis in the Capitol, and it's worth pointing that out, that the far-right extremism we're talking about includes Nazis. Now, before we bring in the brilliant guests that we're very lucky to have, just some very quick housekeeping. If you've not subscribed, you can do so just by pressing subscribe below. We really appreciate that. We've just smashed 150,000 subscribers on our new channel, which is fantastic. So please keep it going. But also press the notification bell. That way you'll get notifications as and when these videos happen. As well, thank you so much for people who've supported this channel on Patreon/OwenJones84. That enables us to expand the channel with our union, our workers on union wages. It helped create this fantastic, without singing my praises because it was created by a team, but a video we did called COVID Catastrophe. Please do watch it if you haven't already. It's a 30-minute documentary which goes through the horrors unleashed in this country, in Britain, by the repeated failures, whether it be mistakes, but far worse than that, of course, putting money ahead of human life, delays, completely preventable. Britain left one of the worst hit countries on earth. So please watch that. But on Patreon/OwenJones84, that's how we make videos like that possible. As well, if you want to support this channel and put questions to the guests, use Super Chat. If you go to the chat please come to YouTube, by the way. If you're not watching this on YouTube, come to YouTube. But press the $sign. And then if you want to contribute to help expand the channel, but put questions to the guests, that's how you do it. So now we're going to bring in and I should say it's in two halves. Later on, I'm going to do a rant, by the way, about British commentators who've used this far-right insurrection to indulge in their favourite pastime of it all, bashing the left, using horseshoe theory to somehow pivot from Trumpist fascism in the United States to somehow making this about the British left. But we'll talk about that later. I will spare my American guests. But joining me are two really fantastic journalists we're very, very lucky to have. Let's bring them both in. Ryan Grim from the Intercept and Dave Weigel from the Washington Post. Thank you so much for joining us at a very tumultuous time in the US.
Yeah, good to be here.
Very good to be here and a big fan.
Right back at both of you. 2020 was a roller coaster and bam, 2021. Right in we go. Let's just start with Dave, because Dave, you were there. You were there at the Capitol yesterday. So do you want to just describe to people watching, tell me what you saw and who are the sorts of people? I mean, I've just flashed up some Nazis, clearly. But tell me about some of the people who, what your eyewitness account, if you like.
Well, I've been covering the conservative movement in some form or another since really 2009, maybe earlier because I was covering libertarians, and it felt like the culmination of a lot of rhetoric that the movement had committed to, and sometimes didn't think it was inculcating people to believe. So I was just reviewing my my tapes and my notes before I got on here because I'm writing a bit more about it, and I at 11:20ish, I was near the Capitol, and a contingent of Proud Boys walked in, chanting "Storm the Capitol, storm the Capitol," and the mind I had 27 hours ago or what have you, is that well they would say that, wouldn't they? Without really processing, though, they really meant they were going to storm the Capitol, invade it, and try to prevent the presidential certification. So there was a lot of violent rhetoric that got more violent. I mean, the crowd took on a momentum as it went on, and you could see this in conversations you were having with people there. That people who were maybe a little bit resistant to join the crowd. And of course, if you're trying to storm a Capitol, it helps to have maybe a small portion of people actually storming it, a large number of people looking so overwhelming that the police don't want to hold it back. And so, but you would find people getting encouraged to join and move up and at least conquer some territory with the intent of overthrowing the government. Now, it sounds silly because they didn't do it, and that seems hard. There's lots of rules the government has in place, mostly for in case there was a terrorist attack on the Capitol, continuity of government plans. But they meant it. I mean, people, not everyone there meant it. And I just, there were some people who were, there was a prayer circle. There were people navigating walls of Jericho. But their intent, peaceful or violent, was we're here to overthrow the government or the elected government because we don't think the election was fair. And beyond that, we want Donald Trump or our movement in power in perpetuity. And they would say so. And it's as I write, I'm thinking, well, there's going to be months of investigations. I mean, Joe Biden's coming in. Unless you're very cynical, I think his Justice Department will be investigating this. There are month investigations where we're going to find out what these people believed, and there's going to be a lot of content that they posted on Facebook that sounded a little silly, a little cosplay, that they actually meant and acted on in the Capitol. I mean, they should be taken very literally, not just as seriously and angry. They literally wanted to overthrow the government.
I mean, Ryan, what's your take on the significance of yesterday's events? I mean, everyone's saying it, but it's worth spelling out what would have happened if these were black protesters, for example, if this was BLM. But yeah, so Ryan, what do you think the wider political significance of this? I mean, this didn't obviously land from a clear blue sky, so put it in that broader context.
Right. It's something that's been unfolding, over the last 40 years, but really picks up steam in 2009 when following the financial crisis, the Wall Street bailout, and then the election of President Obama, and then the unemployment that hung around double digits from there for the next several years. You see the rise of the Tea Party extremely early in the Obama era. Before the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare had been written down on a paper yet. You had the beginnings of the Tea Party forming. In April 2009, you saw hundreds of rallies, against Obama that, were waving the American flag. And by Tea Party, what they meant is that they were patriots and that their opponents were monarchs, were people that were usurpers and were illegitimate, born in Africa, and needed to be overthrown. That was pumped through legitimate channels when they took over the House of Representatives in 2010. Then eventually they took over the Senate in 2014. But the entire time, as it was boiling, it was also boiling in illegitimate channels, and the righteousness, the height of the cause. The country, as far as they understood, was being stolen from its rightful owners, and they needed to take it back. And if you do believe that those are the stakes, if that's your worldview, then it is entirely appropriate for you to take these kinds of actions. And that's why it goes back to the Tea Party and the revolutionary. They keep calling for another 1776, and they meant it literally. They meant blood. They meant a revolution. They meant restoring the proper order. And to them, they mean restoring democracy, but a democracy that is controlled by them. So what you saw is a heightening of that, throughout the Trump era, and Trump recognizing that and just absolutely, dumping fuel on the flames after the election. You see this rise of an alternative right-wing media, which is happy to fill the imaginations of all of these people with the idea that this was legitimately stolen. And you have actual lawyers who are still barred, like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, who are making false claims, but those, they're making the claims, and the people who are hearing them are believing them. And when Trump told them to head down to the Capitol, they take him seriously, and they take him literally. And Dave is right. There were a lot of people on Facebook who were saying, "I'm going to Washington. I have said goodbye to my family." This was a conversation I had when I was being shipped overseas to war, and it was a hard conversation I had with my family. Now I'm going to Washington. I might not return, but I am willing to die for this country. And that was circulating on social media, and people were kind of chuckling at it. Like, look at these Trumpsters, what clowns they are. They think that they're going to be able to breach the walls of the United States Capitol. A couple thousand diabetics, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are gonna conquer the most protected building in the world. Get out of here! This is utterly ridiculous. And so the morning of the vote, you have a small handful of officers guarding these different doors. Certainly not enough to hold back this crowd.
I mean, Dave, that broader context that I was talking about, how the beast was fed by the Republican Party and the right-wing media for a long time, including by leading Republicans who often found maybe Trump a bit vulgar, but in terms of the substance of what he represented, they had created it. But, not just in the kind of broader context, we've just seen these runoffs, of course, in Georgia, where Kelly Loeffler, the Republican candidate, ran an extraordinary campaign, which you could mention just in terms of what sort of rhetoric she deployed. And also, I'm interested, these attempts by senior Republicans, Mitch McConnell, for example, to wash his hands of it all, and some of the more gullible members of the British press pack have said, "Oh, Mitch, he's realised that this is a grave moment in the history of American democracy and the responsibility he has." It'd be great if you punctured that as well.
Well, that assessment of Mitch McConnell is not 100% wrong. There's some percentage of it that's wrong. But Mitch McConnell has always he's wanted power to appoint conservative judges, and he said kind of what he needs to say on the campaign trail to make that happen. He has not really dove in with both feet on the kind of rhetoric that we're talking about. He's always couched it, and in America, just channeling the spirit of 1776 or the spirit of the founders is pretty common. So he would do that and talk about how the founders want this, the founders want that. But he was not one of these Republicans who talked the way that Ryan is talking, who talked the way the House members who challenged the vote or appeared with the president were talking. But yes, he waited a very long time to say this wasn't going to happen. His initial plan was just to hope that no Senate Republican challenged it, because without getting into the weeds, in order for there to be an electoral contest, you need a senator to join the House members. Had no senator join the House members, then if people could have come to D.C. to try to stop this House vote or demand that Pence, I think a lot of the same things would have happened. They would have said Pence should have the power to just reject the electors, send it back to the states, the rest of the hogwash they were saying. That would have done that. But no, McConnell did not act, and I like, without reading his mind, how much of it was just kind of cynicism about how, well, this is the stuff we always say to get people out to vote. How much of it was genuine surprise at how this actually unfolded. So yeah, sorry to disappoint you. He was not, but there are people who egged this on. He was not one who egged it on. He was one who allowed it, which was much more common. That Republicans just said, "Well, this is all right. They're going to work this out. They're going to blow off steam." But clearly, we've been here before. We've had Tea Partiers show up at the Capitol. We've had them show up at our offices. We've had teamwork with them, and a lot of the Tea Party movement of 2009, 2010 was directed by the Koch charitable network, conservative donors. A lot. I mean, most of the successful conservative rebellions in this country have come for. Rick Perlstein didn't coin the term, but the term is usually boardroom Jacobins, which are wealthy people who fund kind of revolutionary shaped organizations. And a lot of them, they were in on this because they did not take it seriously. They basically were we're fueling this with hoping that people stop short of trying to overthrow the government.
Ryan, I mean, how representative are these of these far extremists of the Trump broader coalition? I mean, a poll, and I should say, by the way, Joe Biden just had a news flash. He just called them domestic terrorists. But so in the words of Joe Biden, these are domestic terrorists. But what do you think of a poll? You know, there was a poll suggesting more Republicans than not approved of the storming of the Capitol. I mean, how much is now the Republican Party the Trump Party? You know, how represented, how big a demographic? Because it's for a long time, you know, people might look at that and think, well, that's just the most extreme, zealous, overexcited Trump supporters. They only represent themselves. So how big a social force are we talking here?
Well, if you take the polls seriously, that show that a huge and overwhelming majority of Republicans believe that the election was stolen, then it stands to reason that a majority of those same Republicans would agree that action should be taken to prevent the stealing of an election. That's what people on the left and liberals have to remember, is that it looks absurd and it looks wrong, it looks immoral from the perspective of understanding that it's completely based on a lie, that Joe Biden won quite convincingly, and that there was some tiny level of fraud like there is in every election, but nothing remotely approaching anything that would overturn the election. If you come at it from that factual basis, then the storming looks just completely unhinged. But the hinge came off earlier in the chain. You know, the hinge came off with the overwhelming majority of Republicans saying that the election was stolen, and that it's a conspiracy that runs, you know, deep into the bowels of the government. And many of the Republicans believe that McConnell himself and John Roberts are in on this scheme. Now that's not going to get you a majority of Republicans, but it's a non-trivial number, and probably almost all of those who were storming the Capitol yesterday would tell you that John Roberts and Mitch McConnell, if they know who Kevin McCarthy is, they would think that he's in on it. My best friend of many years growing up was there with them, running up the steps. You know, this is a broad cross section of Republicans who are consuming the same media diet and you know, are just in another world. And they also believe that they were treated completely unfairly by the police. They believe that the police, you know, when it came to Black Lives Matter, were gentle with them, were understanding, allowed them to loot and riot and burn cities. But when all they want to do is have their voice heard in the people's house, lethal shots are fired at them. Like that is their perspective, and there's just zero overlap with the counter perspective.
I mean, Dave, in terms of what happens to Trump, in terms of the possibility of him being removed, I mean, at least one Republican congressman has actually called for him back to, you know, removing him. Perhaps through the 25th Amendment, which I'll let you explain. And if so, the chances of him facing prosecution. People get very excited online, the kind of so-called the resistance people, that the inevitable downfall of Trump will always cut, and it hasn't, obviously. So what do you think? Will he be removed? Is that plausible? And do you think prosecution is plausible too? Yeah,
well, I mean, not to be glib, but when this has come up today in other conversations and people said that can't happen, I said, yesterday morning, I would have said that storming the Capitol and evacuating members of Congress wouldn't happen, but it did. So yes, it's technically possible for the next 13 days. The 25th Amendment is that the vice president and the majority of the cabinet need to agree that the president is unable to perform his duties, which is very loosely defined. And that's usually used, you know, for a few hours. The president's in surgery, the vice president gets to be president. Let's just move on and forget this in a couple hours. He could do that. It's never been done in this circumstance. Democrats have the votes because they have a House majority to impeach. That's just one vote. And they do not. The Senate is the impediment. That's one thing Democrats are already citing to say, well, we wouldn't actually succeed. But you need 67 senators to do so. So if every Democrat, because these Democrats who won in Georgia aren't seated yet, you'd need every Democrat plus 67 total.
19.
So yeah, to 19 Republicans to sign on. And there were more than 19 Republicans who approved of Joe Biden's victory. They're resistant to that, but the mood here is very different than I can ever remember it being among even some Republicans. Now, are they going to just try to wait out the clock and not take a position? That seems like the most politically advantageous way to handle it. A lot of them are putting out statements where they don't even use his name. But in theory, they have the power to do that. For the people, for the population of people who want some accountability for Trump, some investigation of Trump, noon on the 20th, he's a private citizen, and all the arguments that his legal team was using in order to block lawsuit after lawsuit against him, to hide his taxes, etc. That's moot. So he'll have lawyers still, but maybe not the same lawyers who want to work with the president who tried to engineer a coup. Why did I say coup? Tried to engineer a coup. Sorry, I've been up for a while. But the people who want to see some accountability for him and hope that becomes much likelier if he does not find some mechanism to pardon himself, which is questionably constitutional, pardoning himself for crimes he has not been convicted of, or if Pence did take power, which I just said was pretty unlikely, and he pardoned him, that would obviate that. But if Trump just leaves office in 13 days and slinks away with none of that happening, I think he's going to be tied up. There'll be investigations of this, for example. There's going to be recreations of what he knew, what he ordered, his role in inciting the riot. So he for all of the liberal fantasies that came crashing with the end of the Mueller report and the end of impeachment last year, that is pretty realistic. I mean, I don't think there are many Democrats who are going to refrain from investigating him. There's going to be a chorus of "let's move on" people, but that chorus was very loud 2 days ago, and it's quiet now.
Ryan, in terms of this movement, which we saw, I suppose, a vanguard of the movement storming the Capitol yesterday, a huge amount of energy, and they do have a popular base of support. There's a very significant base of support in the country. Where is that going to go now? What's going to happen? I mean, we saw in the Obama years, Obama, somewhat ludicrously, a relatively centrist Democrat portrayed as a communist, as a Muslim. There was the whole birther conspiracy, which Donald Trump himself, of course, fanned. But there's a far bigger and angrier far-right movement in this country now, which has a figurehead, which has been whipping them up. What's going to happen? I mean, how much could this escalate from here on in?
Well, electorally, what they discovered in Georgia is that, I mean, there were a lot of different factors at play, but without Trump on the ballot, they shaved a couple crucial points off of their ability to turn people out in Trump areas. And in a country where the key elections that decide control of the government are won by 4 digits and 5 digits, that small margin matters. So that's one takeaway. Then you have the question of whether these dweebs in the Senate, like Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton, can kind of fill the shoes of a macho alpha Trump in the eyes of Trump's base. And I've always been skeptical of that, especially because they haven't always been 100% with him. Ted Cruz called him a sniveling coward, and that clip will always live with him, even if Cruz was willing to base himself and object to the Electoral College on Trump's behalf. And so, in order to ride this right-wing populist authoritarian wave, you need some level of celebrity so that you reach into a mass audience that some of those figures don't have. And that leaves you with people like Donald Trump Jr., who is rumored to be thinking about running for the Senate in 2022 in Pennsylvania, where like a good salt of the earth populist, he went to boarding school. But he has a lot of connections in Pennsylvania, and he's absolutely a credible threat to win the Republican nomination. Maybe he immediately runs for president. If Trump isn't impeached, he could run for president again in 2024, which is an advantage for Democrats and for many, many Republicans who don't want him to run, of impeaching him, because once you're impeached, according to the Constitution, you're also disqualified from ever holding office in the future, or you have to go into some type of media personality, like a Tucker Carlson, because Donald Trump is unique in the sense that he's a celebrity in America. He's been famous every day since the 1980s, and he's never really drifted out of the public consciousness by his own volition. He's very good at staying relevant in the public eye. And so you need all of those elements to come together, and very few actual politicians have all those elements.
I mean, Dave, I'm very interested in that because there are those two schools of thoughts on Donald Trump. There's either the school of thought, which is Trumpism obviously will outlast Donald Trump, that actually it could end up latching onto a more effective and dangerous demagogue. I mean, Tucker Carlson has just been mentioned. I think Tucker Carlson's a pretty formidable media personality. I think I've watched one of his polemics, and I'm not saying the hair stood up on the back of my neck, but it was effective. It was powerful. I could see why it would tap into an angry constituency. So on that, that's one school of thought. It could find someone more effective. The other is there's something specific about the showman Donald Trump, and actually Trumpism as we know it won't be able to outlast this very specific character. I'm also interested, a social media, now obviously he got a suspension on Twitter. I mean, someone did point out after the fall of the French occupation, everyone was a member of the French resistance, and all of a sudden tech companies are saying, oh, we need to stop him promoting violence. But, Twitter has done that. Facebook and Instagram have suspended him as well. Does he even have that much? I mean, what is his power without social media? Genuinely, that is quite an interesting question. I mean, a lot of the protesters yesterday, you could hear them parroting things he said on social media. So I'm interested in that. Where do you fall on the Trumpism? It will survive, it will thrive after Trump, or actually it's kind of attached to him?
Well, on social media, there's kind of a whack-a-mole aspect to that because let's say he was banned from every social media or outlet that we know of. There's even Parler, which is the kind of Twitter alternative created by the right so that they have their own Twitter they can't be banned from. If that was even banned, what circumstance do you create social media that he's not able to join and share his message on because the audience will find him? So that's an active question, and this is not really over. I mean, there's still members of his cabinet resigning. The degree to which Republicans will say this guy is an anomaly that we never want to run for anything again. Maybe it's going to be 6 of them. Maybe it's going to accelerate. I don't know. On whether someone else could run like him, I don't rule anything out ever, but Trump did, beyond his TV personality, the fact that he was a wealthy businessman was very, very potent. And I heard it because I was in Georgia for the final days of that campaign, which is revealing in 2 ways. One, even now, after everything Trump has done, after having Secret Service stay at his hotels to make his money, after hiding his taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you always hear from voters, he's a businessman. He doesn't need to do this. He's uncorruptible because he's rich and he's successful, so he knows how to turn the economy around. And until they're figuring out what to do with him now, and also, look, the economy was good. A businessman made the economy better. Tucker Carlson can't say, remember the 3 years I was president and the economy got a lot better. He's just a guy on TV who yells about liberals and changes his positions when they're convenient. There's lots of people like that. He's very good at it. So I'm not sure if someone else would have the same ability for Trump to do that. And the second point I make about Georgia is you had 2 Republican candidates who were trying to run as versions of Trump. They both were extremely wealthy. And you had Kelly Loeffler, who you mentioned earlier, pointed this out in her TV ads, that she didn't take a salary and that she gave her money to COVID relief, something only a very wealthy person can do. But she was just incredibly phony as a politician. Hard at 49% of the vote's not nothing, even in a red state. But just no people who were not already going to vote for her for political, I'm a Republican reasons, did not believe this person was a real populist like Donald Trump was. I mean, he has an alchemy that I think is hard but not impossible to repeat.
And Ryan, what do you think? If you were a Democratic strategist now, what would be your plan? How would you deal with the phenomenon of Trumpism that's been, which the genie out the bottle? What would your approach be?
I think what you do is use this moment, this failed insurrection, to force the reckoning within the Republican Party that they've been papering over for so long. And you also, I think, just structurally from a Democratic point of view, small d Democratic, you have to make people pay a significant cost for launching even a small scale insurrection like this one, because if there's no downside to an insurrection, then you only have potential upside, even if it's a long shot. And therefore, anytime something doesn't go your way, you launch some kind of violent assault somewhere, and you just see where it goes. If there's a possibility that it could go badly for you, then you might think twice about it. The saying is not, if you come at the king, it's okay if you miss. And so they need to make it very clear to people what the actual saying is. And Trump missed, and there have to be consequences for missing. And the act of investigating and prosecuting and getting towards those consequences then forces Republicans to take sides. Mitch McConnell's nightmare, he said out loud, that this is a terrible vote on the Senate floor for Republicans to stand up and say that Joe Biden was elected president legitimately, because then your only choice, or your only choices, are bad ones. Either you do the right thing and the honest thing, and then you tick off a majority of the Republican base, or you do the wrong thing and encourage a lie and feed into this metastasizing cancer that's inside the party. So what you have to do is you have to force those kinds of decisions, those kinds of political decisions, and just see which way the Republican Party goes. And when they go outside the lines, you have to prosecute them.
So to our viewers, we've got another brilliant guest to come, but it's a very extraordinary time in US politics and US history. You're both writers. You have a lot to write about. So thank you so much for joining us today at a time of tumult. Stay safe out there. But absolutely fantastic. Really, really brilliant insights. Really gives a flavour of what's going on the ground and what's possibly to come. So thank you for your wisdom and insight. It's hugely appreciated.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Speak soon. Take care, both of you. So I'm going to bring in another fantastic guest. Please, if you're not watching this on YouTube, come on into YouTube. Subscribe. Press the subscribe button below and notifications. You can support the channel on Patreon/OwenJones84. If you want to support the channel as we expand, you can use super chats, put questions or stickers, whatever you want to do. Treat yourself. But I'm going to bring in our next fantastic guest, Sarah Jaffe. Please come in, Sarah. In you come. The water's warm. Hello there.
Hello. Welcome to America, I guess, is the story.
Well, indeed. I was going to say, this is having a bit of a shocker, but I like the way we compete with each other country-wise about who's collapsed into more turmoil and chaos. But I think you've got the edge at the moment.
Yeah. Well, but you guys have like more coronavirus cases per capita, right? I think so you're winning on that one.
More than anywhere.
No, because most of this country can't or won't get tested. So
there is that.
On that too.
We do have more death, unfortunately, at the moment, even per capita in the United States. Just to introduce properly, because I want to do this properly, Sarah. Sorry, we need to talk about that. I'm sure we'll talk about the pandemic. Sarah, for those who don't know, is a absolutely fantastic writer with a book out. Drum roll. We're going to put up the front cover. Are we going to put up the front cover? Yes. There it is. Work Won't Love You Back. Do order yourself a copy. Before we go into the weeds of American turmoil, give us a little précis. Give us obviously people should go and order it after, or at least keep this window open. But explain. Give us a précis.
Work sucks, and yet we're supposed to love it, or at least pretend to love it. And that has been going on sort of throughout capitalist history, but it's a lot more prevalent now, and I attempt to explain why.
Everyone buy the book immediately. Again, leave the window open. Okay, let's kick off. So, Sarah, you are someone, you're a bit of an expert on movements in America. You've been part of protests. Can I ask, covering movements as you have, about the police reaction? Because a lot of people have pointed out, if they were left-wing, and most specifically, if they were people of color, if they were black protesters, people have suggested the police reaction would have been quite different. So let's just talk about that.
Yeah, it's not surprising in the least in this country to see the police sort of shaking hands and taking selfies with right-wing protesters, Trump-supporting protesters. Something like 83% of police voted for Trump. I've been saying for the last 4 years that, cops are Trump's base. And so, yeah, and I think most of your viewers have probably followed the protest this summer, saw the extent of police violence, of not just the sort of immediate police murders that kick off the protests, but then the level of militarization that comes in after the fact. So you see, tanks rolling down Main Street. And it's not all that shocking that didn't happen yesterday, again, because we're used to this. I've been saying since Trump lost the election that, I can't wait. That's a big ironic. Can't wait to see what the 2.0 version of the Tea Party is going to be, right? Because the Tea Party under Obama was showing up with guns outside of Congress. And the level of audacity, I guess, of what happened yesterday is only, sort of growing something that's been out there for a while. And so, honestly, the thing that I'm surprised by is that only one person got shot yesterday.
I mean, if we were going to put this in the broad sweep of United States history, this particular phenomenon, because obviously it's sometimes portrayed, there is, I kind of call this the kind of, it came out of a clear blue sky model of politics. Some centrists have to do with political upheaval. Brexit in this country, Corbynism in America, whether it be Trumpism or the rise of the American left, aberration. When did this happen? Why is it happening? Is hysteria? What is delusion or whatever? Why can't we have our utopia in America? It was the Obama administration. Everything was fine. Here, bizarrely, the 2012 Olympic ceremonies, the opening, apparently everything was fine then. So how would you put this in a broad sweep? Because the Republicans, in a similar way, I mean, you don't have a social democratic party in the United States, but under Eisenhower and so on, they accepted government intervention in the economy, higher taxes on the rich. Even under Nixon, Chomsky once famously called Nixon the last liberal president. Obviously, they were carpet bombing Southeast Asia at the time. But he said, we're all Keynesians now at the time. And Reaganism obviously shifted that in the way Thatcherism did. But what do you think, because it's the moment you keep seeing George W. Bush in the most annoying way, held up by centrists as a man of, this great moderate man alive in the rapid death. So
Bush had a tweet yesterday about all this. Actually, George Bush was saying something along the lines of like, "This is how transfers of power happen in banana republics," forgetting what banana republics were, which was, of course, the American United Fruit Company invading and destroying countries in order to grow and take more bananas. So anyway, the bit of American history that I kept thinking about yesterday, and that historian Annalise Orlick brought up this morning, is the after the inauguration of Andrew Jackson, who was a Democrat, who was famous for being an Indian killer, right? He was responsible for Native American removal in a lot of parts of this country before he became president. And he sort of ran on this white male populist platform. And famously, after his inauguration, this sort of crowds of, sort of working class and yeoman farmer white men stormed into Washington to have big parties, come into the White House, get their muddy boots on everything. And it's that kind of picture. Like, everybody's seen the picture of the self-anointed Coup shaman guy, right? With the like buffalo headdress on and the American flag makeup and this real weird mishmash of American signifiers. But like, that history harks back to, before Andrew Jackson, really, but to this history of America. I keep telling everybody to read Greg Grandin's book, The End of the Myth, because it really reminds us all that American history is hundreds of years of defining freedom for white men in particular on how many other people, usually non-white people and sometimes white women also, that they can oppress. Or literally own, remove, kill, shoot, invade, whatever.
That was quite. I mean, sorry, I was literally absorbing that
history there. No, but I mean, white supremacy is old stuff in this country, right? And like disrupting, literally seceding, committing treason in defense of slavery. These are things that have happened over and over and over and over again. So. Yeah, again, anybody who's sort of going on the news going, this is not how we do things in America. Yes, it is. It's always how we do things in America.
I mean, on that, there was obviously this constant, I think quite simplistic and helpful debate, but I mean, just going into it, which is in 2016, the Trumpist phenomenon. How much was it economic insecurity and how much was it to do with white supremacy? How much was it white lash, essentially? If we look at yesterday, those protesters, and I went through a thread before, there were a lot of Nazis, just genuine Nazis. Not kind of, are they maybe, the left are throwing the word Nazi around for anything vaguely right-wing. They're just Nazis.
No, there's a guy in an Auschwitz shirt, like literally, and sorry to explain to everybody that anti-Semitism is actually pretty much a right-wing phenomenon. Anyway,
let's talk about that. I mean, how representative?
Oh God, don't make me talk about anti-Semitism. No, it's really, I think that back to your original question, which is the question of, is it economic anxiety or is it racism? As if those two things have not always been intertwined. As if like the foundations of class are not bound up with questions of race. And again, that the founding American identity in particular is one's ability to oppress, repress, own, or exploit people who don't look like you. So, when we have economic crises, people double down on protecting the sort of family group, the tribe, the in-group, the people who look like you, the privileges that whiteness is supposed to provide. When it stops actually providing those, people lash out. And so, in a country that elected Barack Obama twice and probably would have elected him a third time, yes, Donald Trump was obviously a figure of backlash, but also, he's very good at tying the backlash together in a nice little bow, right? And saying that the reason that your job is gone is because there are immigrants, right? Like that's a connection that Trump and the Tea Party leadership and all of these senators who until yesterday were happily going to try to vote to overthrow the election, all of them have been very clear about explicitly making these points and explicitly blaming the economic anxiety on racialized minorities in order to make sure that nobody blames it on the people who are actually responsible for it, which, are people like super rich Kelly Loeffler and, in fact, bosses like Donald Trump. I never tire of sort of noting that Donald Trump is famous for firing people on national TV, and yet everybody somehow believed this guy's populism is going to bring the jobs back. But, again, this is very old American history, and I just shudder at people who say that they had no idea any of this was coming or have no idea what this connects to.
How much, we were talking about this before, we're now seeing kind of senior Republicans trying to wash their hands of Trump and this was an aberration and how embarrassing. How much do you think, in terms of the Republican machine, how much it fed this beast? Also, that I'm interested, because we talked about that with the previous guest, I'm interested in your views on that, but also, what's the role of the Democratic establishment and their failures in this as well?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that like if people had somewhere to go, if there was somebody making a really coherent argument about what actually happened to the economy and why people are screwed, why their businesses are closing down, why under the pandemic people are being forced to choose between risking COVID and going, broke. If anybody was actually making a forceful case for that and backing it up with policy proposals, they could succeed. In fact, that's basically what happened in Georgia, right? That like yesterday, the big news before a bunch of goons invaded the Capitol was that the Democrats won both Senate races in Georgia. The first Black senator from Georgia got elected, Reverend Raphael Warnock. John Ossoff, third time's a charm, I think. And maybe just a second. Anyway, one of these people who was running a more suburban focused campaign and lost that seat for Congress a few years ago, then the seat was won the next time around by Lucy McBath, who famously is the mother of Jordan Davis, who was killed by a white supremacist. In any case, so what we see in the failures of the Democrats is people who had voted Democrat suddenly voting for Trump because Trump is at least talking about problems that they feel, that they understand. We talk about states like West Virginia becoming red states. Well, West Virginia was the home of the mine wars, of really, really important, significant working class battles for survival, for decent living. And now these are states that are Republican strongholds. That's not that wasn't inevitable. That's not something that happened because those people are inevitably just going to vote for conservatives who lower taxes for rich people and do nothing to save jobs for people who used to work in coal mines. This is rooted in many, many cases in the failure of the Democratic Party to actually take care of working people, and the failure of the Democratic Party to actually talk about, think about, understand, and fight racism in this country. And again, those things are fundamentally intertwined, and you can't sort of pull them apart and say, well, like the economic anxiety goes here and the racism goes here. But especially in the US, but basically everywhere, these two things are always, always wrapped up together.
In terms of, I mean, we were just talking before about this poll which shows that more Republican voters than not supported the insurrection, the storming.
I think 45% of Republican voters. So
a plurality. It was more than those who didn't, which I think was about 43% who disapproved.
Yeah.
Where is this energy going to go? How much do you think Trumpism outlasts Trump's presidency? And how much are you of the school of thought that it's so attached to Trump, the figure somehow, or could it find a more effective and more dangerous demagogue? I mean, what will happen, do you think, under the Biden presidency? I mean, we saw what they were like, less organized under Obama. What kind of, how much can this escalate?
This is Tea Party 2.0, right? It's got more guns and more buffalo horns. But it's absolutely not going anywhere, and it is not tied to Trump. Because again, the Tea Party wasn't created by Trump. Trump actually hitched his wagon to it, famously, becoming one of the loudest voices calling for Obama to release his real birth certificate, implying that he wasn't born in America. And so, Trump rode the Tea Party, not the other way around. And we should remember that because, again, these are threads in American politics that predate this, racist landlord from Queens. And they will continue to exist. The white power movement goes back many, many years. The Confederacy was a thing, and people yesterday were waving Confederate flags. They were also waving flags with Trump's name on them. But, in addition to the Nazi symbols and the whatever, they're waving Confederate flags. This is not going away. It's not going back in the box. Even if Donald Trump came out tomorrow and made a total denunciation of everything these people believe, told them, in fact, it was all a con, which it kind of always was for him, they're not going anywhere. Like, I don't know what the Q conspiracy theory would do if it didn't have Trump to wrap itself around, but I guess we're about to find out. So, the interesting thing is like the rats leaving the sinking ship right now, like Elaine Chao, who is the transportation secretary and is notably married to Senate currently majority leader, not for much longer, Mitch McConnell, announced that she's quitting 2 weeks to go. Real brave statement there. Somebody pointed out on Twitter that Elaine Chao was standing next to Trump when he made his famous comment about the Charlottesville protest, where a lot of these guys who showed up yesterday at the Capitol or at other state capitals were involved, that, there were very fine people on both sides of Charlottesville. So like Elaine Chao was totally cool with that. But now she's resigning with 2 weeks to go. I'm very impressed with all of these, again, rats leaving the sinking ship. But will the Trump base, maintain loyalty to Trump? Some of them, let's just say, like the base of the Republican Party is people kind of like my mother. It's suburban white people who will vote for a three-legged dog if it's on the Republican line on the ballot. It was not particularly about Trump for a lot of these people, and it will not be about Trump the next time. The Trump base, the motivated sort of activist base, the same as the Tea Party base, is a little bit different in that these are people who are actually willing to get out there and raise some hell. And sort of like the same thing is true on the left, that not everybody is out there at the protests. No, but not everybody is out there willing to take a risk. There's a newly mobilized and newly sort of empowered and really catered to. I mean, Trump yesterday is saying things like, "We love you, you're very special." Like he's literally sort of patting them on the head like they're his kids. This base that does really personally care about Trump, but is also invested in a particular strand of sort of white supremacist populism that, again, goes way back in American history. They are probably going to see people like Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence now and all the rest of them as traitors the way Trump does. I don't know what that actually shakes out to look like. I keep thinking of Sarah Palin after the failed attempt to become vice president under John McCain. She sort of became a news personality, had a website that around the Tea Party election in 2010 had crosshairs on target seats. And that was, of course, when Gabby Giffords got shot. Again, like violence against members of Congress, also not new, also not been that long. So Gabby Giffords, for people who don't know, was a Democratic member of Congress from Arizona who was shot. She survived. And I believe her husband is now a senator. Anyway, I just, sorry, I can go like off on 20 different tangents about American history here. The point, I think, is that like predicted ends to the Democratic Party, or to the Republican Party, also to the Democratic Party, have come a lot, and they have not in quite a long time been accurate. You know, Barry Goldwater went down in flames only to give us Reaganism shortly thereafter. So I'm loath to predict anything, but I think the splits in ruling class power blocks are always interesting. And I think it's frankly scary as hell that a bunch of people yesterday learned that they can charge into Congress and basically nothing will happen to them.
I mean, yeah, it was famously said about Barry Goldwater that he won the election. It just took 16 years to count the votes. In terms of, just an interesting question from Raja, how much do you think the Biden government can do for workers? How will that affect ongoing support for Trumpism? Well, I think the expression says it all, but let's hear.
No, absolutely. It's a really good question. Just before I came on here, I learned that Biden had nominated Marty Walsh, who is the mayor of Boston, to be labor secretary, and was just discussing with some other labor geeks like me what that actually means. Marty Walsh is famously actually a union guy. He was the president of the Building Trades Council in Boston before he became the mayor. He's also kind of an old white guy and has been a pretty bad mayor of Boston. There's a lot of discussion that he would not have won his next term, and so got sort of airlifted out by the Biden administration. There are a bunch of things that Trump did in terms of executive authority that can be undone fairly quickly by appointments to things like the National Labor Relations Board. Fiddly things like that that can, in aggregate, make it a lot easier for workers to join unions. There's a piece of legislation called the PRO Act that Bernie Sanders is one of the people behind that would, again, do a lot of things to make it easier to unionize. If we get, now that the Senate has swung, although now it looks like they're not going to come back in for a couple of weeks, maybe, unclear, we could get this, well, the PRO Act getting through Congress is pretty unlikely because it would have to actually pass the Senate, and the Republicans will almost certainly filibuster it. So we're going to be looking at things that are kind of small, or can they push through something like $2,000 checks that sounds like and feels like something to regular people? And a lot of this is going to really depend on what they do in terms of pandemic management, right? Because like the faster we can actually get people vaccinated, get businesses reopened, get life back to feeling like some semblance of normal for people, that will do a lot, I think. And so far, I mean, I'm talking to all of you in England who are back on lockdown. Like, we know what it feels like to have it fail. And that, again, like I think that crises, again, create moments where people are grasping for solutions. And that's a thing that allowed Trump to gain hold. It's a thing that has sometimes allowed the left to gain power. But I don't have a lot of faith in a Biden administration to push that hard on legislation for working people. The Obama administration famously sat on the Employee Free Choice Act, sort of saying, after we do healthcare, after we do healthcare. And of course, healthcare was basically the only thing they were able to do in 8 years. Just
finally, because it's a very busy time over there, and we're locked down, so there's nowhere I can go. But your time, on the other hand, you've got things that's going on over there. So I just want to finally ask, what do you think the strategy of the left should be vis-a-vis the far right, which we discussed, people charging, staging insurrections, but also in terms of putting pressure on the Biden presidency? Because of course now the Democrats have the presidency,
right,
and they have both houses with the caveat of a +1 based on the vice president, Kamala Harris, and there's a very conservative Democratic senator. But in terms of what leverage the left has, in terms of both, what the strategy should be.
So it's sort of widely discussed that after Obama became president, the left kind of sat back and waited for him to do things. And I don't think that's going to happen this time for one simple reason, is that there's just a lot more left there. There are also more louder, more, popular left-wing members of Congress than there were, right? Back in 2008, Bernie Sanders was still in the House, and he was kind of one of a tiny handful of people. And now there's a whole bunch of them. Cori Bush, bless her. I am so thrilled that Cori Bush is in Congress. Cori Bush comes out of the movement in Ferguson. She is a nurse. She is she's incredible. And she was the first person out of the gate yesterday to say that her first legislation in Congress would be trying to expel anybody who supported the coup yesterday. So there's a lot more space in the public discourse for the left now than there was then. And there's a lot more left willing to take the streets. And I think, once again, like the size of the protests this summer and fall should remind us that people's lives are not getting better right now. People's lives have gotten materially worse by quite a lot in many cases in the last year. They've lost family, they've lost loved ones, they've lost jobs, they've lost homes. And so what needs to happen now is like more of everything. And that's true on both ends, right? It's true to put pressure on the Democrats. It's also true to provide a pole of attraction to hopefully win some people away from Trumpism. It's absolutely necessary in terms of people's just material existence. The folks at a Kansas City tenants union have declared January a no evictions January, and they've been shutting down housing court both in person and virtually to make sure that people aren't getting evicted. And it's like things like that actually affect people's real day-to-day standard of living. Whether you have a home is really important. I think things like that are going to be the most important thing going forward, because again, they provide people with a reason to join the left, not just so you can dunk on people on Twitter, but to actually, save your house, save your job, improve your job, make sure you get paid, make sure you get that $2,000 check, cancel student debt. There was a rally in Philadelphia the other day for student debt cancellation. All of that stuff is going to need to continue to happen, and it's going to need to get bigger and louder and more widespread, because the problems, just thinking of the common joke about liberalism, it's like, yes, the problems are very bad, but their causes are very good. Mm-hmm. And so we have to not back off of talking about the structures that are ruining people's lives. We're talking about capitalism. We're talking about white supremacy. We're talking about what has gone on in these series of crises that have shaped most of our lives over the last, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 years, we're in this period of profound dislocation for so many people, and people are looking desperately for answers. And some of those answers are being, put forth in the form of really horrifying conspiracy theories. And we have to give people a better option. There's just sort of no choice to that. And that doesn't mean catering to racist beliefs and being afraid to say that that's racism, but it means making sure that people understand the material basis of racism, the material basis of why they're losing their jobs, the material basis of why the government is content to let you all die of coronavirus, what all these things are linked together, how all those things are linked together, and the people who are benefiting from the way things are right now.
So don't go, everyone, because I've got one final thing to do, but I'm going to let Sarah go because that was absolutely brilliant. Really incisive, thoughtful stuff. Really the history, the context, and some hope, which I think I would like to inject some hope in
discipline, as Miriam Kaba says. So
exactly. Don't forget to get her book. Should we flash up her book on the screen again? I think we should. Yep, there it is. Oh, Ella. It's a very sexy looking front cover.
Thank you.
Am I saying? And a really interesting subject as well, one which has become, on this side of the Atlantic and yours, very, very topical. So thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there. And I will speak to you soon, no doubt. But I really appreciate you coming on. Before we finish, I'm going to do a little, there's something that I will need to get off my chest. I really do need to get it off my chest. Before I get it off my chest and let you go on your evenings, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, press the notifications bell. So that means you'll get notifications when we've got these videos coming up. Support us on Patreon as we expand, Patreon/Owen Jones 84. We've got an expanding team on union wages. You can see some of the work we're spending that money on. For example, we've just done a documentary, the COVID catastrophe, about the calamity enveloping Britain, the tens of thousands of deaths caused by the absolutely horrific management of the pandemic by the Conservative government, putting money ahead of human lives, the delayed action. I've gone through the list. It's pretty grim, but I think it's really important to watch and to get the message out. So please do those things. Like the video, subscribe. If you can support us on Patreon, really appreciate it. So to get off my chest, there's two things I want to get off my chest. Firstly, in Britain, because we talked about the enablers of Trump and Trumpism in the United States. In Britain, several publications, I'm talking about The Spectator magazine, which is chaired by Andrew Neil, the former flagship BBC producer. Thank you, by the way, talking about the video there. Flagship interviewer, Andrew Neil, setting up a new TV channel now, a right-wing, hard-right TV channel, because there's a lack of hard-right media outlets in Britain, of course. But The Spectator and The Telegraph have repeatedly published apologism for Trump. They said, ranging from, oh, he's not that bad, everyone's being hysterical about him, to actually, a lot of Trump is good. He might be vulgar. He might be too crude for our tastes, us genteel British conservatives. But actually the substance they liked. And now some of them are trying to wash their hands of him. The likes of Douglas Murray, for example, washing their hands of a man whose politics they explicitly supported, because they said, and this is, I'm talking about Douglas Murray. I'm talking about Darren, what's his name? The alt-right guy. I've forgotten his name completely. They said, if there is violence on the streets of the United States of America, it will be the left. It will be Antifa. It will be BLM. That's why the shops have to be boarded up. That if the right lose, they will be disappointed, but they'll go home. And look what happened yesterday. An attempted insurrection by right-wing supporters of a candidate who lost fair and square in the presidential election. And now some of them start writing, the likes of Douglas Murray, they start writing their screeds. Oh, this is all Donald Trump's fault. Oh, the horror. They supported everything. They supported his politics. They supported his program. They didn't like some of the vulgarity in the presentation, but that's not what counts. It's the substance. A man, a white nationalist, Islamophobic president of the United States. We knew who he was from the beginning. We knew it wasn't fear-mongering and all the rest. And yet, these right-wing, these hard right-wing commentators in this country now suddenly protest innocence. They can't get away with it, and they should be held to account. And the other thing I want to raise, yes, Darren Grimes, thank you, everyone. The other thing that I want to raise, some British commentators and one politician, who I'm not going to name because the last thing some of these people need is the publicity of oxygen, have used the events of what happened yesterday to bash the British left. They're obsessed. The left lives in their head rent-free. It doesn't matter that the Labour left have been driven from, they've lost the leadership of the Labour Party. It doesn't matter. Vengeance still has to be wrought. And they saw the scenes, right-wing extremists trying to stage a coup to overturn a democratic result. and they compared it to the left in this country. They made common cause. They made a comparison with the student protesters in 2010 who took to the streets, and I was one of them at the time, took to the streets against the imposition of student debt, punishing people for daring to dream for a university education from which all of society benefits. After the Liberal Democrats went into an election, inspired at the time many of those young people in 2010 to vote for them because they'd scrapped tuition fees. And they took to the streets, their first taste of democracy. In many cases, they took, exercising their freedom of expression. They were told at the time, young people are apolitical. They only care about computer games and reality TV shows and X Factor. They won't protest. They got involved in politics, and then they had to be battened and kettled and all the rest. And they made this equation. Now, I'm not doing this for reasons of pity, because people have had a lot worse than me. There's a man currently, a far-right extremist, who's serving a 2-year, 8-month prison sentence because he attacked me on my birthday in 2019. A court ruled because of homophobia and hatred of my left-wing opinions, because I was a left-wing gay man. That was the culmination of a systematic campaign of harassment, relentlessly targeted in the streets by Tommy Robinson and Donald Trump supporters wearing MAGA hats, including attempting to physically assault me, constant death threats and threats of violence. Now, when I say people have had it worse, I mean a lot worse. I mean Joe Cox, the Labour MP, who was murdered by a far-right extremist. I mean Rosie Cooper, a Labour MP, a fascist who's now in prison because of a terrorist plot against her to murder her. I mean another far-right terrorist who ploughed his van into a crowd of Muslim worshippers who Darren Osborne came to London because he wanted to kill Sadiq Khan and Jeremy Corbyn. I mean the far-right plots, several far-right plots now, which have been thankfully foiled in this country. And I mean people who are attacked and targeted on the streets because of their colour of their skin, their religion, the fact they're gay or trans, and hate crimes in this country have surged statistically over the last few years. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, because most hate crimes aren't reported. How dare these people try and equate the left to these people? How dare they try and suggest there is any equivalence between fascism and the left? Any equivalence between those of us who happen to believe that utilities are best owned by the public rather than by profiteers, that rich people should pay more tax, that the welfare state should be stronger so poor people and disabled people and others, low-paid workers and many others, are punished by a brutal and rotten system. That young people shouldn't be saddled with debt because they want to have a university education. That maybe we should have radical action to deal with the climate emergency, given it is an existential threat to the human race. That maybe we should redistribute wealth and power in this country. How dare they equate that to people who are racists, who hate people because of the colour of their skin and or religion, who hate Muslims, who want to scapegoat migrants and Muslims and refugees for all the crimes committed by the powerful. And they suggest there's an equivalence between the two. That peaceful civil disobedience and protests, including direct action by the left to achieve those ends, is the same as far-right extremists, including Nazis, attempting to stage a coup d'etat to overturn a democratic election. That's how rotten the politics of this country has become. And this needed to be said. It was a rant, I warned you, but it did need to be said. I've got it out of my system. Please support the channel, subscribe, press notifications, like the video if you can, Patreon/OwenJones84. From now on, by the way, there's a pandemic going on. I should have explained. We're doing the show on Sunday at 5 o'clock, every week, 5 o'clock. But also now we're doing it every Thursday, hence today, at 7 o'clock, at least for the duration of the crisis, which might be a while. This Sunday joining is Anthony Costello, already confirmed. Please look him up. He appears in the video I did about the pandemic. He's a doctor who urged this country to lock down, who before we did last March, who saw how serious the pandemic was. And it's absolutely, I mean, his knowledge, he unlike the politicians of this country, if he had been running coronavirus policy, we might not be locked down now and tens of thousands of people might not be dead, including over 11,000 people in this day alone. So please join this Sunday. We've got many other shows to come. I'll announce the other guests in due course, but join us this Sunday at 5 o'clock, next Thursday as well at 7 o'clock. It's been a pleasure. Those were 3 brilliant guests. Really appreciate everyone for joining. Take care. Look after yourself. I'll see you soon.